You and I know that 42nd floor conference rooms have views that cost thousands just to glance at. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole city laid out like a glittering grid of corporate greed. Inside, dead silence. The heavy, suffocating silence of total executive failure. The boardroom's so-called brightest tech minds had spent 3 sleepless days glaring at monitors, running diagnostics, bickering in hushed, panicked whispers, and hitting the exact same dead end, nothing. Right in the middle of it all stood our CEO, Alexandra Reed, running one of the fastest-growing fintech powerhouses in the country. She slammed both hands flat against that shiny mahogany table and glared at the suits. Then she dropped a line that none of us grunts would ever manage to forget. $10 million to whoever fixes this. The entire executive team just froze. Then from the cheap seats in back, some guy in a wrinkled shirt slowly stood up. None of the bosses knew his name, nobody gave him odds. But in under 5 minutes, he'd make every senior executive in there absolutely terrified to breathe. You see, Alexandra Reed built Vantage systems from a legal pad doodle in a cheap Boston rental up to a massive $4 billion tech empire. She was 41 years old, ruthlessly focused, sharp. And the woman had never once missed a deadline she set. The fancy financial press always called her a visionary. Rival executives called her terrifying. Both descriptions were completely accurate. 3 days prior, on a totally normal Tuesday morning, the company's main flagship product crashed. Our top-tier artificial intelligence risk platform, Atlas, started spitting out data that made absolutely zero sense. Not just slightly off, catastrophically, wildly wrong. Atlas was the actual engine driving hundreds of massive institutional investments. Major banks used it, giant hedge funds relied on it. Huge sovereign wealth funds literally built their entire quarterly strategies around its AI projections. Now it was dumping numbers with margins so bizarrely terrible, they looked like complete jokes. The exact second that first glitch hit, Jonathan Blake, the big-shot chief technology officer, dragged in every single engineer and data scientist on the payroll. The highly paid experts burned through Tuesday night and all Wednesday. By Thursday morning, the list of bugs they had officially ruled out was incredibly long. The list of actual fixes, totally empty. Word finally reached William Hayes that Thursday afternoon. Hayes was the type of billionaire investor who never called. He just summoned you. He had dropped the largest single financial bet in our entire startup's history. And patience was definitely not in that man's vocabulary. His message to Alexandra was chillingly cold and precise. Fix the system within 24 hours, or your capital agreement gets reviewed. Let's be real. In high-level finance, the word reviewed basically means utterly destroyed. He tacked on a little postscript that the smug billionaire probably loved writing, saying he felt confident she understood the extreme urgency. She definitely did. She also knew the truth. Hayes had never actually built anything himself, and his massive pile of cash gave him unearned leverage over the real workers. But right now wasn't the time to fight that little corporate injustice. Alexandra just stared at that screen for a very long time. Let's watch as the CEO stepped back into the boardroom. She scanned the drained faces of elite executives who had hit rock bottom. They had utterly failed, so she made a desperate choice that stunned everyone in that room. She opened the tech crisis to anyone brave enough to try. The payout, $10 million. Time limit, just 1 session. The only catch was that you had to walk into that boardroom and take a real shot. Naturally, her PR team fought it. Top executives yelled that it was madness. Alexandra quietly heard them out, nodded her thanks, and blasted the bounty out to the entire company network anyway. Michael Carter caught that alert at 7:43 a.m. He was shoved inside a ceiling panel on the 38th floor, arms braced against a hot air duct, listening to a busted compressor rattle. He had spent the last 40 minutes trying to nurse the dead metal back to life. The massive bounty flashed across his cracked phone screen. $10 million, critical system fault. Open challenge, 42nd floor, 9 a.m. He read it twice, shoved the phone in his pocket, and went right back to fixing the vents. Michael was 38 years old. His badge read Facilities Maintenance Tech Level 2. But the truth is, this unseen guy kept the corporate headquarters breathing. The air systems, the power grids, the server room chillers, the backup engines. He had held that invisible job for just over 4 years. Stick with me here, because before that he had a massive gap on his resume. 2 whole years where he did absolutely nothing of value, and honestly he did not care at all. And right before that dark period, he had a high-stakes life he walked away from forever. He lived with his 6-year-old little girl, Hannah, inside a cramped 2-bedroom flat 20 minutes out by bus. Hannah had her mother's eyes, and her dad's heavy silence whenever something was eating at her. She loved tough puzzles and a beat-up stuffed rabbit named George that never left her side since toddlerhood. Michael packed her brown bag every morning and walked her down the street, ground through his maintenance shifts, then grabbed her from aftercare. When those building repairs ran late, she hung out in the grand corporate lobby, clutching George under her tiny arm, usually dead asleep in a chair by the security guards before he clocked out. He had trained himself to keep his life tiny. Tiny meant safe. A small life never demanded pieces of his soul that were already gone. The dark truth behind that resume gap and his blue-collar escape was a hidden secret he only examined in dead silence. He used to be brilliant at his craft, rare, undeniable genius. His stunning machine-learning architecture caught the eye of massive firms that never usually looked down from their towers. But the final algorithm he was hired to build, for a startup he deeply trusted, it came with a hidden trapdoor that was absolutely no accident. A rigged data scheme designed to trigger whenever the market shifted. It would secretly print money for elite institutional clients. You and I both know who pays for that. Everyday investors who never saw the knife coming. Michael marched in and warned leadership. And those boardroom elites smiled, calling the fraud a feature. I had refused to proceed. You and I both know how corporate tech works. They fired me on a Thursday, handing me an agreement with a smirk that guaranteed I'd never work again. I signed their paperwork, went straight home, and completely walked away from the field. That was 6 years ago. My daughter Hannah was a newborn then. But career losses are easy to swallow when you get something that actually matters. I sold off my high-tech equipment, packed up and moved into a smaller apartment. I found manual work that kept my hands moving and my head in the present. Building maintenance didn't ask for my brilliance. They just needed me to clock in and fix whatever broken mess was right in front of me. Honestly, I learned to appreciate that quiet life way more than I expected. I hadn't thought about the corporate tech world in years. I definitely wasn't thinking about it as I climbed down from the ceiling panel, signed the compressor logbook, and headed straight over to the service elevator. I hit the button for the lobby, intending to check a leaky coolant line down in the east stairwell. But the doors dinged open on floor 37, and there stood Hannah, clutching her stuffed animal George, wearing her little school backpack. Right behind her was the lobby coordinator, looking totally apologetic and a little winded. She explained that Hannah's after-school program canceled halfway through the day because of staffing shortages, and they couldn't get a hold of anyone else. Hannah just looked up at me. My brave girl didn't say a word. She just slipped her tiny free hand right into mine. I stood there in the elevator for a second, squeezing my daughter's hand, staring hard at the floor indicator above. The number 42 was glowing bright. We rode all the way down to the lobby in total silence. I couldn't speak. I found a quiet chair by security, sat her down with George, and handed her a granola bar from my jacket. I kneeled down to her eye level and whispered that Dad had to handle something upstairs, and asked her to wait right there for me. Hannah just nodded, already tearing into the little snack wrapper. She always understood me, no big explanations ever needed. I stood up tall, marched back to the elevator, and hit 42. The 42nd floor was a completely different universe up there. The boardroom felt heavy. It had that tense, brittle air of a place where highly paid geniuses kept failing and were desperately trying to save face. Stale coffee cups and useless diagnostic printouts literally buried every single flat surface. Every whiteboard along the north wall was absolutely crammed with frantic network diagrams, complex data flow charts, and cascading error trees. Picture the sad, accumulated wreckage of every single approach that completely failed. Jonathan Blake was pacing at the front of the room. Fancy suit jacket tossed on a chair, expensive dress shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. His face wore that tight, controlled mask of a guy who drained his patience 3 days ago and was now just burning on pure, suppressed corporate panic. Next to him, a so-called elite team of senior engineers slumped in total defeat. Then there was Henry Cole, who'd been with Vantage for 7 years. Everyone called him the absolute smartest guy in the artificial intelligence division. He had just wrapped up pitching a desperate software fix that took his team 14 agonizing hours to build. It was extremely thorough, sure, but it demanded 6 whole weeks and $3 million to actually deploy. CEO Alexandra sat there, listening to the whole pitch without interrupting. "You and I know the score." She asked one simple question: would it stabilize Atlas in 18 hours? Henry took a heavy, defeated breath and finally replied, "Honestly, I cannot guarantee that at all." Alexandra politely thanked him and asked him to sit. The boardroom suits knew exactly what that dead silence meant. 2 more useless proposals followed. An overpriced tech consultant who flew in overnight pitched a whole new software architecture that was beautiful on a whiteboard, but totally worthless for our deadline. Then an elite data science crew from the auditing firm they kept on retainer rushed in and showed off 17 slides of deep analysis, concluding with stunning detail just to tell us the crisis was bad. Neither fancy presentation moved the needle forward a single inch. The big executive, Jonathan Blake, was starting to totally unravel. He barked at 2 of his own people just for asking basic clarifying questions. He cut Henry Cole off mid-sentence and loudly announced right in front of the whole room that if this garbage was the best the infrastructure team had, then they needed a serious talk about firing some staff. Henry went dead quiet and just swallowed his pride. Everyone noted the toxic bullying. The CEO Alexandra watched it all happen. She stopped playing referee to save her energy for the billion-dollar crisis, but she missed absolutely nothing. She never did. It was 9:20 at night when the back doors of the executive boardroom swung wide, and Michael Carter finally walked right in. He was still wearing his dirty work gear gray pants, a faded blue shirt that might have been clean yesterday, but certainly hadn't survived a tough shift. Steel-toed boots leaving dusty scuff marks all over their shiny $1 million floor. His basic maintenance access badge dangled straight from his belt. He looked exactly like what he was: a blue-collar repair guy who took a very wrong turn. "Stick with me here." 2 fancy admin staffers rushed to block him from the table. One guy, a junior assistant in charge of the schedule, stepped right up and quietly asked if he was lost and in the wrong room. Michael simply stated he was here for the $10 million challenge. The kid just stared at him, scanned the cheap shirt, the dirty boots, the badge. Then he looked back at Blake, silently begging the top boss for some clear directions. Blake didn't drop his voice. "We are not running auditions," he yelled from the front. "If this is someone's idea of a joke, I would ask that we not waste the next 10 seconds on it." The expensive suits at the far end chuckled at the working man. One elite consultant leaned in to whisper a joke to the guy beside him. Both of them smirked at Michael, dripping with the kind of smug arrogance that belongs strictly to guys sitting safely at the top. Michael didn't even blink once. He ignored the assistant, ignored Blake's ego, and locked eyes directly with the CEO, Alexandra. He stared right at her, totally silent. "You know what happens now. She studied the tech for exactly as long as necessary. Our CEO didn't survive a whole decade in an industry that hated having women upstairs by making lazy assumptions about a person's true character." There was something about how he stood so calm, totally ignoring the boardroom's obvious disgust. That definitely wasn't the stance of a guy who just stumbled upstairs by accident. 5 minutes, she ordered. Every suit in that room knew she meant our guy Michael. Blake immediately tried to complain. Alexandra shot him a cold stare that basically told him to shut his mouth. So he shut up. Michael stepped up to an open computer terminal. He didn't beg them for a tour of their fancy network. He didn't even ask those supposed experts what fixes they'd already attempted. He just stared at the main diagnostic screen for a second, then asked, sounding exactly like he was just putting in a routine maintenance ticket downstairs, if he could get full access to the input pipeline logs from 72 hours before the crash. Not your processed reports and no summary sheets. Give me the raw input log. Cole glanced up. We already checked that log, the executive said gently, so many times. I get that, Michael replied. I still want to look. Silence hit the room. The suit glanced at Alexandra. She just gave a quick approving nod. He typed a quick command, transferring access. Michael took a seat. All those boardroom elites watched him, curious but annoyed that a working-class guy was wasting their highly paid time. That snob Blake checked his gold watch twice in the first 90 seconds. Let me tell you, what Michael was doing completely went over those highly paid heads. He wasn't staring at the same useless error logs the executives were reading. He dug straight into the pre-processing layer. That hidden step right before the AI engine even gets the raw data from the main feeds. It's a piece of the network so basic that the so-called geniuses upstairs never even checked it. They just assumed it worked. But guys in infrastructure, we know nothing is stable. That's the secret. He'd spent his life sweating in the hidden tech spaces those fancy engineers completely ignored. Living in the basement taught him that deep infrastructure bugs never flash a warning sign when they finally break. They just let the whole damn system quietly drift off course in ways that look completely crazy to the executives only looking at the shiny surface. He caught the bug in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It wasn't the AI. Not a corrupted model weight, no failed API call either. Not a server failing on us. It wasn't any of those 17 fancy categories the expensive audit team had flagged. Just one tiny data normalization subroutine out of dozens, quietly updated 12 days ago during routine maintenance. That server patch had slightly changed. A timestamp feature by a margin so incredibly tiny that none of their isolated tests ever stood a chance of catching it. But this entire massive system made all its calls by analyzing thousands of tiny data connections over long periods. So you and I know if you feed it data skewed by just 400 milliseconds, and all those logical ties it relies on just quietly wander off. Not right away, but slowly, exactly how this massive crisis first started. You and I know titles don't mean much. The expensive AI wasn't broken, it was just fed garbage data. Michael just leaned back. He stared at the monitor for a second. That quiet look a real expert gets when they finally solve the puzzle and just need to double-check it. Then he turned to face the executives. The glitch is in the market data normalization layer, he announced. Specifically, the timestamp alignment function inside the real-time feed preprocessor. It got updated 11 days ago, causing a 400 millisecond skew in a single input channel. Atlas is working perfectly. It's just been processing corrupted time data. The boardroom went completely dead silent. Henry Cole suddenly sat up straight. Before Michael even finished his second sentence, Jonathan Blake sat perfectly still. Down at the far end of the table, 2 junior engineers were already scrambling on their laptops, pulling up that exact subroutine. That would be a 2-line fix, Henry muttered quietly. He wasn't arguing the point. He was just calculating. 3, Michael corrected. You should add a validation flag so the preprocessor catches this exact skew automatically from now on. Jonathan Blake finally spoke up. That whole section got reviewed. There is no way we missed that. The arrogant executive tone was gone, replaced by pure panic trying to hide behind absolute certainty. He stared at Henry Cole, begging the tech lead to say this guy was entirely wrong. But Henry ignored him. Henry was glued to his own monitor. I can pull the commit log, Michael offered. The patch was marked as a minor performance boost. Nobody flagged it for regression testing across the whole pipeline. The CEO stood up. Run the test, she ordered, staring straight at Henry. Henry Cole began typing rapidly on his keyboard. Nobody in the boardroom dared to speak. The giant screen showed Atlas running through its normal diagnostic sequence. The exact same sequence that had been spewing catastrophic errors for 72 hours straight. The market data layer loaded up. The feed preprocessor engaged. Look at this with me. Those 3 lines of code, found by Michael in 47 minutes, explained in 30 seconds, processed the feed. The output finally resolved, clean, stable, and perfect. Henry slumped back into his expensive chair, his face caught right between total shock and pure relief. It was a heavy mix of both. A software engineer down at the end of the long table covered her mouth in absolute awe. Another guy just closed his eyes and breathed out slowly. The high-paid executive, Jonathan Blake, remained frozen. Alexandra Reed stood silently at the head of the boardroom, staring hard at that clean system display. Then she turned to Michael Carter, still sitting at his computer terminal in a messy, wrinkled shirt and scuffed work boots. He waited with the quiet patience of a guy who had nothing left to prove to the suits, and honestly, never really cared to anyway. This entire boardroom of elites laughed at him 40 minutes ago, now dead silence. Because true talent always wins. Within an hour, Alexandra's staff started making discreet inquiries. Let's be real, the HR directory just confirmed what his cheap badge already implied. Michael Carter, building maintenance technician. Pay grade 2, 4 years here. No fancy tech degrees on file and 0 college history listed. To the suits up on floor 42, the guy was a total nobody. But what our corporate system couldn't show Alexandra was his life before joining us. His work gap was just labeled self-employed. His references were a random property management outfit and some local community college adult education coordinator. Neither lead meant much, so our CEO started digging a whole lot deeper. It took her corporate lawyers and private investigators nearly the entire afternoon. By early evening, they handed her a hidden history pieced together from obscure public records, dense academic papers, plus the buried secrets of a tech industry that always hides its biggest mistakes. Turns out Michael earned an MIT doctorate in computational math by age 26. He spent 3 years at a military AI lab doing work that was considered by the few top-tier experts actually smart enough to understand his math. Absolutely world-class. Then he jumped into corporate machine learning design, joining a financial tech startup named Meridian Analytics that was pulling in massive venture capital. He lasted 2 years at Meridian before walking right out the door. The ironclad gag order tied to. His exit was brutal, covered up by standard corporate legal talk and empty excuses. But there was enough left behind in leaked emails and government letters that went completely public later on during. Let's piece together what really happened to him during that massive federal fraud investigation. The bosses demanded he code a system he knew would hurt innocent people. He said no, and they stripped away his entire professional life for it. He never fought it publicly, never tried to clear his good name. He never begged for money or pity. He just walked away from a greedy corporate culture that disgusted him, choosing a quiet life with a mop and bucket instead. That federal investigation into Meridian ended 18 months later with massive financial penalties and a bunch of disgraced suits stepping down. That same exact software Michael had refused to touch got finished by some cheaper coder and launched. It caused the exact catastrophic damage he predicted right before regulators finally ripped the plug out. But none of that vindication gave him his old career back. Alexandra read the whole file twice. She just sat there forever, staring out at the skyline through the exact same expensive glass the boardroom had, trying to imagine the sheer guts it takes to walk away from your life's work. A job you are brilliant at simply because staying means turning into a monster. She remembered his scuffed work boots standing on our shiny corporate floors. She realized he hadn't even been mad at the wealthy executives who laughed right in his face. She thought about the heavy price it costs someone. You and I have to wonder how someone carries that past silently, never demanding applause. Picture this: our CEO Alexandra marched into the boardroom. Michael was still sitting there, completely alone. He was studying the terminal with that calm focus of a guy doing honest work. He finally looked up. "Your daughter is downstairs," Alexandra told him. "Security says she fell asleep about 20 minutes ago." Michael just nodded. "I knew he'd already checked with the front desk 3 times since 9 a.m. "I know exactly what you walked away from," Alexandra said. She said it plainly, no corporate spin. It sounded like a boss who wasn't faking her sincerity for once in her life. Michael stayed perfectly quiet for a moment. Then he finally replied, "It was a long time ago." "It wasn't," Alexandra fired back, "not the part that counts. You and I know how corporate works." Next morning, they hosted the rewards ceremony where the entire tech crisis had unfolded. The senior leadership team was gathered to watch, plus the board's operations committee and William Hayes himself. Hayes looked way more humbled than he did yesterday. A certified transfer document for $10 million sat right in front of our CEO. Michael sat directly across from her. The guy wore a clean shirt, nicely ironed this time. His daughter Hannah wasn't around. She was at school exactly where she belonged. with Toy George safely packed in her backpack. Alexandra slid the massive payout across the table. Michael just stared at it. He picked up the heavy pen resting next to it, but he didn't sign anything. "I'd like to discuss the amount," he said. The whole room instantly tensed up. I watched a few executives nervously exchange confused glances. "I am not rejecting the money," he told them. "Let's be completely clear about that. I just want to know if we can structure this payout a little differently. A figure closer to $800,000 lets me buy a decent home in a good school district for my daughter. It sets up her college fund and gives me a smooth career transition without money stress. That is all I need. The rest of those millions would do way more good somewhere else, instead of my bank account. Let's evaluate this together." The room went totally silent while Alexandra just stared at him. "You solved a massive problem that was pushing this startup toward hundreds of millions in losses," she reminded him. "Yet you're asking for less than 1% of the huge reward you earned." "I'm only asking for what I need," he said. "Those are two different things." I saw something in Alexandra's face subtly shift. The kind of crack you only see in executives who usually hide their emotions perfectly. You could see the raw respect in the way she was looking at him now. "So what happens with the rest?" she finally asked. "That is the exact problem I want your help figuring out," Michael replied. Turns out the real genius wanted to fund a tech ethics mentorship for fresh junior engineers. Rookies just joining the industry who hadn't yet faced that ugly corporate moment. That day when a boss demands they build something totally unethical. He just hadn't figured out the legal structure for it. "Look, we know geniuses rarely sit at the top." Before Michael signed anything, Hannah arrived. Daycare ended early, some scheduling glitch. The lobby desk rang Michael's phone, but of course the guy had it on silent. So our security brought Hannah upstairs. She burst right through our boardroom doors, little school uniform, heavy backpack on. A stuffed monkey poked out her bag as she spotted her dad across the massive table. She absolutely bolted down the entire length of the executive room. Michael swept her up, holding her tight against his chest. She yelled out his name with that pure trust kids have. She knew he'd always catch her. Half the executives in the room suddenly pretended to read their corporate strategy documents. Our CEO, Alexandra, a woman who didn't hit 41 by losing her cool during a multi-billion-dollar crisis. She just stared at the ceiling for a second, then glanced back down, jaw tight, hands neatly folded on the table. But I saw her smirk, that faint little grin you get when fighting back real emotion. Safe in her dad's arms, Hannah scanned the intimidating room and spoke. With that blunt 6-year-old confidence, she announced his shirt looked much better today. A couple of executives chuckled. That crushing panic we'd felt since the startup collapse began just vanished. The room finally breathed a little. The morning after the big tech awards, Alexandra dragged Vantage's top brass into a secret session. It definitely wasn't on our public calendars. The main topic was accountability. Blake showed up. He took the exact same seat he'd used during 3 miserable days of failing to fix this. Our CEO kept her speech very short. She laid out 3 cold, hard facts. First, the whole engineering floor watched him publicly humiliate Henry Cole. We all saw it. Second, and let's look at this together, he fired the guy who actually solved the crash. That showed a massive lack of professional judgment that she simply couldn't ignore. And third, Vantage's culture, under his so-called technical leadership, had become a toxic hierarchy that was ruining the actual software quality. Blake brought a prepared defense, but he kept his mouth shut. Something about her sharp words, totally stripped of any visible anger. Her cold, factual list of his mistakes made any argument feel completely useless. He handed in his resignation days later. Alexandra took it, then announced a massive shakeup for the whole tech leadership team. She pushed Blake's power down to the ground floor, to the coders actually building the systems. Henry Cole got bumped up to interim chief technical officer. The very first thing he did in charge was to force a strict review process for any major software pipeline updates, adding deep regression testing that checked out the entire overall network. Henry openly credited the idea to Michael Carter from a quick chat the day we fixed the crisis, when Michael had casually mentioned, "Because you and I both know the deadliest corporate failures happen silently, hidden right in places everyone assumes are safe." Then Alexandra called. She phoned Michael 2 days after Blake packed up, offering a huge new role. She laid out a title, the $10 million reward structure, and his reporting lines. He heard her whole pitch without saying a single word. See, real genius rarely sits in boardrooms. He politely declined the massive offer. She asked why. He told her he had thought deeply about the specific kind of work he desired, and the exact type of impact he actually wanted to make. Neither of those goals fit inside a traditional corporate executive role. True visionaries know their worth. For him, absolute freedom was the only way to maintain his integrity. Instead, he pitched a completely different idea. A purely freelance consulting arrangement with zero standing obligations, and whether she would actually advise him on structuring this new mentorship program he was building from the ground up. The CEO agreed to both instantly. She agreed without a second thought. For a ruthless executive, that was rare, and she knew it. The small apartment Michael and his daughter Hannah shared for 4 years had served its purpose well. Very manageable. It was cheap, right by the bus stop, featuring a window in the kitchen that caught the sunrise perfectly. It honestly made the cheap coffee taste incredible. But their new house boasted a great elementary school nearby, plus a backyard opening up to a quiet little park. Hannah had claimed her new bedroom by simply marching right inside, sitting straight down on the floor, and firmly announcing it was hers. Her stuffed animal, George, took the windowsill to officially mark their new territory. Michael spent his Saturday afternoon repairing a broken latch on the back wooden gate. It had been totally jammed during the home inspection and had not magically improved since. Coffee resting on the porch, tools arranged carefully on the grass, he moved with the precise, deliberate calm of a brilliant mind finally free from corporate deadlines. Drifting through the open kitchen window, he heard Hannah lecturing George with that serious, logical tone she saved for painfully obvious facts. The repair was basic. Soon the gate would shut perfectly smooth. And it would remain fixed, provided you actually understood the root cause of the sticking issue. A tiny little misalignment in the wooden frame, worsened by trapped moisture, multiplying into a problem that felt completely jammed when it was just slightly off. You and I know true genius spots patterns. He saw the same exact principle across every massive corporate crisis. A multi-billion-dollar collapse almost never starts out massive. The origin is tiny. It stays quiet, hiding right where the executive board assumes everything is perfectly fine. He fixed the tricky latch, placed the screwdriver down, grabbed his warm cup of coffee. The CEO had texted him earlier regarding the new mentorship program. She asked about the complex structural model he designed. He purposely had not replied yet. He would answer later tonight, once Hannah was asleep and the house went completely silent. Slowly and without any major drama, he was discovering that the firm boundary separating his former corporate life from this new reality was not an impenetrable wall anymore. He could engage with the boardroom selectively. It was possible to bring his quiet brilliance back into a corporate machine that nearly ruined him entirely. Only this time around, he alone dictated the final price. The back door swung open, and his little girl appeared right on the porch steps. Dragging George by one ear, she asked if he was done yet, announcing she was starving and demanding eggs for lunch. 10 minutes, he said. She considered the offer. 5, she countered. He just smiled. Let me tell you, that genuine smile was showing up a lot more lately. Much more in these past weeks than any time prior. 5 million, I agreed. The CEO rushed inside. I finished my coffee. The service gate latched cleanly behind me when I tested it. Smooth and perfectly quiet, the way a real solution operates when built right. You see, some corporate repairs take years. The biggest breakthroughs rarely happen while the boardroom is watching. True fixes are done the right way, for the right reasons, deep in the quiet machinery itself. Those are the structures that actually hold.